Oh, so welcome to No Till Gardening. Um, my name is Mark Goskowitz, and I've been doing this like my whole life. Not no till gardening, but growing things. I'm sure, like you, I had parents who had a little home garden. And my dad would get the rototiller out once a year and till up the soil, and it'd be all nice and dark and black. And we'd get in there and we'd start planting little rows of things. And there's eventually a time where my dad like let me take over the garden. Let me take over the garden. I could do the whole thing, and I went and bought stuff, and things failed, and that's okay. And I eventually, my first high school jobs were working first on an organic farm, where I got to see like I started my my very first job. I started working in on not just any farm, but an organic farm. It was a small family farm, Highland Pistol Seed Farm in Canterbury, Connecticut. And then I used to go to farmers markets and everything like that. And then I went to a different farm, Hart's Greenhouse and Florist in Canterbury, Connecticut as well, hometown. And that's where I kind of like learned a lot of the greenhouse stuff. In the winter, when you're not like, planting things, you're building greenhouses, you're maintaining things and stuff like that. And so even as like a high school student, I learned how to do a lot of that stuff, to be hands-on. As an adult, when we moved here to our property here in Colchester, I started our family farm garden with my wife about 11 years ago. And I'm also a teacher, and I teach 8th grade math and then we have 7th and 8th grade students. And in the middle school, about 5 years ago, with my friend John Wojtowicz, we started a school garden, and it has an orchard. It's got like everything. You're going to see pictures of it later on. And really, it's through that obsession with like creating a school garden and learning to teach kids this stuff that I started offering these classes. So a little bit about me, a little about where I come from. Everything that I teach is based around like organic practices. So that's what you're going to get from this. And although because I worked in like a commercial greenhouse, I do know the like conventional, not non-organic methods. And so what you're going to see is like as we go through this, you'll see that the no-till gardening method is one that really promotes natural processes to fertilize your garden and to keep it growing and to maintain it. It's like a really low labor and like high yield result of gardening at home. What you're going to get from this is lots of ideas, and you're going to get a handout. I already put it in the chat, and you'll get an email from me later with access to the recording, access to this, to the handout and the presentation, so you can keep viewing it. And it's a live document. That means at any time in the future, when I reteach this class, if somebody like brings up something else or something new comes about, new book or whatever, I add those in, and those are like live links in the Google Doc. You click on them, it brings you right to it. So you get that set of curated resources. Let's jump into no-till gardening. So sharing screens, and go to presentation. There we go. All right. So you have access to this little handout if you'd like. And as we like go through class, I am going to generally stick to this order of topics. You'll see in the handout that I also get to a page where I say, hey, this marks the end of the presentation, but I give you some more resources from one of my other classes. There are like companion classes that I teach where it's like, if you like this, then you might like this. It's very Amazon-y of me to do so. And then again, there's those live links again that you'll see. All right. So, all right. I got to move my own face out of the way on my thing. All right. Present. So, all right. No-till gardening. Yes. This really is about starting a garden from scratch, or you'll also see my garden transitioning it from a tilled garden to a no-till garden. I did that, I can't remember, 2-3 years ago. I just made the decision to be like, all right, I'm never going to borrow a rototiller again, and I haven't, and it's been great. So Yeah. You already know. I got on demand classes and Zoom classes, and yeah, bam. These are all the things that I teach. A companion class to this one that's going to be offered is the composting one that I'm going to be doing. You can look at that. That's going to be this summer. A soil blocking class is also this summer, and I also do a seed starting class. That one's available on demand. So what's no-till gardening? It's that you're not tilling the ground, you're not breaking up the soil. So like we, as a backyard gardener, we're not thinking about this, but no-till really does. It really does encompass even commercial agriculture. You're not taking this because like you're a commercial farm. I mean, if you are, good for you. But this is for the backyard gardener, this presentation. However, the no-till gardening method is one that's actually starting to be employed on commercial scales because of the benefits that it has. And if we can do that, so again, these are all tilled. These are all tilled. The soils got chopped up into little pieces. And so like in your backyard garden, this is what it could look like, to start a new garden. If you're tilling, it's very labor intensive, even though this machine is doing it and you're not digging. This is a ride, going behind one of these things as it's bumping along, hitting rocks and bouncing all over the place. So nothing. So here's the thing, nothing wrong with that, in that maybe you want to start your garden this way. And then another year, the year after that and going forward, you go to a no-till gardening method. I am not going to we'll talk about how can you turn grass into a garden space without tilling. However, tilling will accelerate that initial process. The problem, though, is tilling year after year has some downfalls. So no-till means I am going to read this slide. You don't till the soil. You don't turn it over from whatever is on top. You don't chop it up and flip top and bottom. That's what happens when you till the soil. You don't break it up every year or even multiple times a year. I look back on my gardening practices, and I used to grow something in one garden bed, and as soon as that was done, I would tear up the ground and replant again, which is great to replant again, but to till up the soil is going to disrupt it. So I say using a rototiller. Yep, I get it. It's fine. However, over time, tilling and digging adds too much oxygen to the soil. Imagine that you're mixing in every time you're doing that, you're adding oxygen to the soil. More so than if the soil were just left intact. Oxygen will get in there, but it's not at a high rate. You are accelerating the decomposition process. And in that, as you accelerate decomposition, the organic matter that's in there, it's going to deprive plants of nutrients. It's going to rapidly release those nutrients rather than slowly release them over years. All right. So digging also brings weed seeds. This is important. There are dormant weed seeds that are below the surface of the soil, 6 inches, 12 inches below the soil. They've been down there. Mice have brought them down there, whatever, little critters, or they've fallen, or they've gotten tilled and then buried, and they have been waiting for their chance to get to the soil surface. And when you till, you bring them to the soil surface, they germinate, and you've got weeds again and again and again and again and again. So digging brings those weed seeds to the surface and creates more weeds to deal with. Turning over the soil also disrupts the symbiotic relationship of fungal networks that's being created. So that's what we're going to see in some of these slides here, is that we'll get to that symbiotic relationship. But no-till, this is what we're thinking of. Don't worry about what this looks like. But typically you have something like, if you're going to turn grass into a no-till garden, you have to decompose that grass. You have to smother it out. Okay. And you put some sort of barrier down that starts to smother it. And then you're adding compost and don't worry about what this is. Do you have to add manure? No. Do you have to add wood chips? No. Do you have to add compost? No. These are options. We're going to see that there's a whole list of options. Actually, if I even leave this, jump ahead into my handout. I want you to see that on the second page of the handout, these are all the types of materials that you could add into a no-till gardening system. We'll talk about some of these in detail. We don't talk about all of them because some are more rare and some are way more common. I guess that's a way to say it, is that some of these are way more common all across the gardening world, your access to them. Like pretty much every gardener is going to have access to compost, because you're going to want to compost your kitchen scraps. And so you're going to have a small little compost pile going. Okay, so as we go through that, No-till gardening is about adding layers on top of the existing soil. That's why I have this here illustrated here. It's so you're going to have your existing soil somewhere here, and you are adding layers on top of it, never really tilling it in. So we'll get into the details of that. But benefits. So you're already starting to hear the benefits, but let's actually list them out. It promotes natural aeration and drainage. Now, that the word there, natural, means that as the soil structure is there and you have worms and bugs digging their way and tunneling through the soil, they are aerating the soil for you, bringing oxygen and airflow into the soil in a natural way. There's also going to be natural drainage of water, meaning like there's going to be some water retention. It saves water because you typically have layers on top, and that stops water from evaporating out of the soil. It slows the rate of that water evaporation because you'll end up with a thin, dry layer that has dried out, but like underneath, it's going to conserve that rainwater or you watering the garden. Either way, you are going to find that you hardly ever water your garden with a no-till gardening system. There are going to be key times at the beginning when you plant and you water, but you'll find that like even in the heat of the summer, you're going to rarely need to water unless you're of course in a drought time. But I mean, that's just common sense. So, but it's going to save water. I mean, honestly, if we're in areas where water is a concern and water is scarce, it makes sense to do no-till gardening. It reduces or eliminates the need to weed. I'm not going to say this is a weed-free thing, but think about it. If we're covering the soil with a thick layer of stuff, it's going to make it hard for weed seeds to germinate. And those that do germinate are going to have to push their way up and use lots of energy to get to the soil surface. And you're going to pluck them out when they're young. And you're not going to have like tons of weeds. You're going to have small little pockets of weeds and stuff like that you can easily deal with. Or as this goes on, I really see that like mine no-till garden, since I haven't tilled it in a few years and I keep adding layers on top, I really have hardly any weeds. It's not a no weeds thing, but I keep on top of it so that any weeds that are there, they never drop seeds. They never get big enough to drop seeds, and I take them out. And so the seeds that are in the ground like become less and less and less. All right, it is going to save time and energy because you are going to do a lot of times. You're going to spend some time setting this up, but it is like the set it and forget it of gardening. The no-till gardening, let's see, it helps soil retain carbon. So if we're thinking on a commercial scale, that's a huge thing with this. We are really talking about carbon sequestration. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, there you go. Have fun like making a meme out of that. Oh my God. It buries carbon in the soil. Yes, there's decomposition, but also in this process, you're going to be burying organic matter in the soil, locking that carbon in for years. It builds earthworm populations. They poop, they feed your plants. That's amazing right there. And they also break down the materials that they're making. Yeah, again, making the nutrients available to your plants helps reduce soil erosions. Because imagine you don't have bare soil. You're going to have rain that falls on this. It falls on the mulches. It falls on the top layers. And it doesn't, it's going to really, really reduce erosion. I know we're reading bullets here, but we're going to get into some pictures and stuff in just a moment. So general methods, the general method of no-till gardening is that you're going to set it up by either tilling once or smothering what you have there. That's the idea of like you've got a lawn, and so you're going to have to smother that grass so that it stops growing. And grass can be pretty vigorous, so it's going to take literally some months if you're going to do the smothering process, but like 2 months, not like 10 months. Or you're going to be transitioning an existing garden to a no-till gardening method. That's absolutely the easiest because you already have your garden space. But these other ones of starting a garden from scratch, it's not that bad. Tilling can be done by hand, by doing something called double digging, where you dig and you flip the top and the bottom over. You don't even have to chop up the soil. You literally take the grass, what was grass on top, and you take about a foot deep and flip the whole thing upside down. So the grass gets smothered that way. That tilling once will help to, what's your whole purpose is to kill the existing plants to make room for your plants. And then you're going to be waiting while that decomposition happens. And then you're going to start to add layers. And the layering actually can happen at the same time when you're smothering. You don't have to wait, but as time goes on, you're going to be layering, and then you're planting and harvesting, and then later on in the fall, you're in the fall or the following spring or winter, you're going to want to revive and add more layers to this. It's like lasagna, folks. It's garden lasagna. All right. So what soil? This is important. So thinking about a wooded area and you've got leaves that have fallen on the ground, soil is not just like the rock, the minerals that have broken down, but it's also all that organic matter that has fallen onto the surface of the soil, has gotten decomposed and brought down into the substrate of the soil. So when we're thinking about what's in the soil, there's so many living things. This is the whole symbiotic relationship. Every time we till a garden, every time we chop it up, if we do that once a year, or just once a year, we are going to be disturbing the environment, disturbing all of those, like that little food web that's going on in the soil surface, and it has to then restart. So it can be something where it's like, it's easy because then you can just plant right into it, but you're going to find that you're going to have to add nutrition. You're going to have to add fertility back to your garden at a much higher rate than you would with a no-till gardening system. While with my no-till gardening system, I'm typically adding compost once every year if I can, or every other year. If you might really have to find that you're not just adding compost, but you're going to the store and you did a soil test, you sent it out, and you have to go to the store and buy different nutrients or elements to add into your soil because they become so depleted because you keep disrupting the food web, and accelerating the decomposition that's in there. So again, just the whole purpose of having a picture like this is just to show you that what's happening, no matter what we're growing above the surface, there's so many things happening below the surface. And when you till, you disrupt that. I think I've driven that part home. Okay, we're going to get into the what garden should I choose part. I just wanted to take a break, not a break, but like, I just wanted to see if there's anything in the chat. Not seeing anything yet. Yeah, so the next part of this is ideas of how can you set up gardens. And many of these I have tried. I have tried on my own garden. I've tried at my school garden. I did them when I was younger in my dad's garden. This is like the artist's palette of how do you want to grow things. Looking at your space and saying, how can I set things up differently? That's what we're going to talk about now. So we've talked about the no-till gardening method. We're going to talk about ideas of what it could look like. Then we're going to get into the how do you set it up, and what are the materials you use, and even some of my favorite garden tools. So I want to take like my like decades of like gardening knowledge, condense it down, and help accelerate your learning with this. So okay, so different ideas of creating a garden. That's what we're really looking here, different types of gardens. So you're going to hear some of the names like raised beds and stuff like that. And so what we're doing is defining them for you so that when you do a Google search later on and you're looking for ideas, you already know what to search for. So a free form or a landscaping, what I mean by that is that those gardens are going to be gardens where you are working with an existing landscape. Or you want to do landscaping. So here's the thing is that even in something that is as formal as this, not an informal backyard garden, but this is a very formal garden. The no-till gardening method is absolutely used in here. Do you think people are getting a rototiller in here and doing stuff? No. Instead, what you're doing is adding layers of mulch and stuff like that. And so I think even just like landscapers, not we, but landscapers have learned how to, well, they're planting many perennial things. I think you're doing no-till gardening because you're interested in doing annual plantings, plants that die every year and you have to replant them, your vegetables and stuff like that, your herbs and your flowers. So here's the thing, those veggies, herbs, and flowers can absolutely be planted among your perennials. These are ideas. Did you ever think about growing like kale right next to your front door? I've done it. Did you ever think about growing? Oh, that's one of actually my favorite place to plant my herbs is in my flower garden outside my front door. Because as I walk outside my front door, I get to see those herbs, and I get to pick them and bring them right into the kitchen. This is the ideas part of no-till gardening. So free form also means that in your garden, it might be like rows and stuff like that. Now I know that's not free, but it is defined, but meaning like you're just like, you're gonna create a row. Now this is definitely a tilled garden, but the no-till garden one could be where you just do general rows, a row of this crop, a row of that crop. And when you read seed packets, they typically talk about rows. It's really like an old-fashioned way of thinking, but it is a conventional way of thinking rather than planting in blocks. That's what you're going to see in many of the other ones, is that we're not planting in blocks here. It's literally one row of this and a walking space and one row of that. It's fine, but you lose a lot of space with all of these walking paths. So again, now they're starting to chunk things up. Now this is definitely a tilled garden, but this can be taken and turned into a no-till garden. So this is one where I don't see raised beds or anything like that. It is just the earth as it is. When I'm critiquing this person's garden, it's a beautiful garden. It's a beautiful garden. However, if this like had straw and stuff on it like that, this garden would like not need to be weeded as much. It would not need to be watered as much. It would be a different environment. So we could have open beds and row gardens and raised rows. That's actually this actually I should switch that picture around. That's kind of what this is. So raised row gardening, if you imagine the water flowing down, in the topography of your yard, when you have little mounds of earth and your walkways and stuff like that, and you follow the topography going perpendicular to it at a right angle to it, not going up and down. The rows are not going this way. The rows are going, straight into the picture. They're going to capture water. Raised beds are going to, when you have areas that could be like muddy and stuff like that, when you raise the soil a little bit, then it's going to help to drain it out. So there is a difference between rows. When we say rows, I'm talking about nothing formal, no wood involved. This is a raised row garden. Now, ever so slightly, there's a little hump here where the soil has been mounded up. And this is actually a picture from from this book, which came out just a couple years ago, Raised Row Gardening. And so it is a no-till gardening method. I will say they waste a lot of space with this, but if you have a lot of space to play with, this is a good book to invest in. Again, why are you here? You're here for ideas. And so that you don't have to search everywhere. And I'm telling you, if you've got a yard where you have a lot of room to play with, open space, then the raised row garden is going to be one that could really work for you. What they do is they end up covering a whole big space with mulch, wood chips or something like that to smother out weeds. And then they have lots of walking paths. And then they are adding layers to only the areas where they're planting. That means that they're not putting compost everywhere in the garden. They're not putting it in the rows, in the walking paths. They are only putting it in the planting rows. And then they're adding more mulch to those. So what happens is it creates a little raised row. There you go. There's your name. So let's go back to that. So again, awesome book, and it's a great idea for large spaces to completely get lots of wood chips and stuff like that spread out, smothered. You could even have like you could have not row cover, like landscape fabric underneath to further prevent weeds. And stuff like that. And then you are only planting in these rows. Now, of course, you can do hybrids with these. This is, again, another raised row where they're really only adding fertility to these little individual rows. Now, again, look at all that wasted space. Not everybody, has the room for that. Now, this is also like a raised row, raised bed. So here we get to the idea of a raised bed versus a raised row. This is a whole bed, and it really depends on how you're looking at it. I look at this, since it doesn't have formal walls up, that this is a raised bed. Okay, so they're continually adding layers to this. Now, we're also going to talk about something called a hugelkultur bed, which this one may very well be. I don't know, because it's not my garden. Oh, so raised beds. Now, that when we get into that, there's this book, Raised Bed Revolution, which I have right here. This is an awesome one. Again, this is about ideas and curating the resources. This book, it has some building projects in it. but it's definitely an ideas book. And absolutely, here's the thing is that you can absolutely go online and Google this stuff all day long and look at pictures and stuff like that. But there is something nice about having a book and having somebody who's taken the time to make all these things. That's what this is. They've taken time to make all these things and explain how to set up raised beds and how to start different types of raised beds from scratch. Yeah, you can find blogs out there and everything, but again, you've got a ton of ideas in one book and plans in one book. So, you've got different types of plans as you go through this. Enough said with that. Okay. A raised bed typically means that we are talking about building something to hold and contain the soil. Why is this part of a no-till gardening presentation? Because we're talking about doing no-till gardening in all of these types of things. Can you imagine putting a rototiller in this? No. I can imagine though tilling with a garden fork or a shovel in this. And what I'm saying is that there's no need to turn over the soil in something like this if we do a no-till gardening method. Now, since we're going to be adding layers to raised beds, we're going to want to not fill them all the way to the top. As years go on, they will fill to the top on their own. And by the way, as years go on, you're going to get boards that are going to rot. The school garden that I built with my friend John, we built it about 5 years ago or so. Some of the beds are just starting to get beaten up now, where we're gonna have to replace some boards. Those are made out of cedar as well. So everything breaks down. And so going with this method is a very formal, nice looking way of gardening. And so if you didn't know about raised beds, like this is what you can do with them. So again, you've got this wonderful gardener, her setting up different ways of protecting her plants. That is a benefit of these raised beds, is that you can add things onto them if you want. Now, remember, you don't have to fill this whole thing with soil. You can start with your initial soil right at the very bottom and then add layers over time, and the box will fill itself. That's what I'm advocating for as a no-till gardener. I'm not saying you've got to go out and buy topsoil and have somebody fill this up for you. No, you don't have to. It will fill up on its own. Okay, but the raised bed structure, now this only has one board across. It's got nice little pathways. I guarantee that they have some sort of landscape fabric underneath this, what it looks like stone underneath this, so that weeds don't pop up underneath it. It looks like they got, a few weeds here and there. But here's what I would suggest is that you see how they put boards here? I've had huge raised beds like this, but they are a problem because you can't access the plants on the inside. If you're going with this method, I would highly suggest that you go with longer, narrower beds, and not thin, but like look at how far you can comfortably reach. I can comfortably reach 2 feet in. And so 2 feet from one side, 2 feet from the other side makes 4 feet, and a 4-foot bed works for me. This is not 4 feet. This is only a couple feet wide. And so this person setting it up, they probably had this space and said, I want to put a bed here. I can't make it too big, can't make it too small. There are limitations. What you're seeing here is that they are also digging by hand to stir up the soil to break this. So this is really somebody starting it from scratch. You can do that, or you can do the no-till gardening method where you first smother this. And by the way, just by tilling up the soil like this, it's naturally going to fluff and expand and fill up the box a little more. Okay, so as we keep going with no-till gardening, other methods of no-till gardening can be used in forest gardens and orchard gardens. You may not have ever heard of this before. So this means that you have perennial plantings of your orchard fruit, and under the canopy of those fruit trees, you have other things growing. And so you have garden beds underneath them. Awesome books that go along for this, if you're interested in setting up little forest gardens in I definitely read these books and I use them as inspiration for my own orchard. By the way, I've got an orchard class as well. That one's happening live today, right after this class. And the forest gardening method is one where you're using the 3-dimensional structure, not just flat growing, but you are also raising your growing, capturing light at the higher canopy, and using vines and planting low growing crops and mid growing crops, all different layers to capture sunlight at all different levels. So you have all of these different levels that you are planting. So if you're really into growing lots of different things and you do want an orchard, consider not having a vegetable garden and an orchard, but actually planting your vegetable garden under your orchard. I've done it. And I have herbs and flowers. I do have a separate vegetable garden, but underneath my orchard, I have herbs and flowers growing, hundreds of feet of them all summer long. And I replant them every year, and I have so much fun replanting those under there. Okay, so this is an orchard, but it's not set up as a no-till garden. What I would be saying is taking this area underneath where there's this dappled sunlight. Now, these are matured trees. As they mature, they're going to take up the sunlight, and you're not going to be able to grow as many things underneath them. But in the early years, when your trees are young, this could be wood chipped and mulched all the way down and turned into a big, long 4-foot wide row. And I've done it. And it makes it really easy for mowing too, because you don't have to mow around trees. You just mow down the path, and then you're also planting things under them. All right, hugelkultur. This is an interesting one. So hugelkultur beds are a no-till gardening method where you are burying logs and sticks. So you're digging out a hole, you're laying down logs and sticks, which break down slowly over time. It's like time-released fertilizer, and then putting soil and planting your garden on top of it. It's a really neat like gardening method. I do it in my perennial garden areas that are on slopes. So instead of doing terraces, my terraced areas are set up as hugelkultur beds, where to stop the soil from eroding, I buried logs and sticks and stuff like that to slowly break down over time, and also give me the terraced structure. So it really is burying. Where do you get this stuff? It's like you go around your yard, you go start picking stuff up, and what happens is the soil on top, the worms and everything start to decompose all of this under here, and it adds long-term fertility to it. Should you still be adding compost and mulches on top? Absolutely. But yeah, again, this, you might be like, oh, that's a raised row garden. But this one was one that was tagged as a hugelkultur garden. So underneath it, it's got those logs, and they're growing their veggies on top. And this is a very formal one that I found, where these are probably 3 feet high in the center. What you get is, instead of a flat surface to grow, you get a mounded surface. Now, is everybody going to do this? No. But if you have access and want this type of structure, this long-term structure in your garden, you could do something like this. Okay. That's it for my whole point is that there's tons of different ways to do no-till gardening. And you are going to look at your space, and you are going to decide, what does the space dictate that I can do? Do I have steep slopes? Should I break those slopes up with little terraced gardens? Do I have gradual slopes where maybe I want to just do rows going across that gradual slope to collect water? Do I want the formality of making raised beds? Do you want the extra cost of raised beds? Do you want the look? And so that's something where it's like you're going to really think through it. And honestly, it's okay to build one this year, and then build another the next year. And then as you get good at it, maybe build a couple more. Soon enough, you'll find that the whole thing is done. You don't have to do it all in one year. And in fact, I would advise you to start slow. And learn on a small scale and go, oh, this worked. Ooh, this didn't work. I didn't put the mulch on thick enough, and I got tons of weeds. And you'd learn that, like, oh, I have to put the mulch actually much thicker in order to not get the weeds. Imagine doing that on like a quarter acre or a very big space and making that mistake. You'd have a big weedy mess. Versus starting on a small scale with one raised bed or one small 10 by 10 area, and learning how much material you have to add. So the no-till gardening method is one where, instead of investing in equipment and in labor tilling, you are investing in materials to add in lasagna layers. Now, of course, everybody's going to want to watch the budget. And so what we're going to do is talk about different material, but really it comes down to thinking about nice, clean materials that will decompose over time and that will not have any adverse effects to your garden. So typically that's going to mean straw or wood chips. Straw or wood chips for many people, because that's abundant. It's abundant in the market. You can go down to Tractor Supply and buy bales of straw, not hay. We'll talk about that, and get all the bales you need to do a garden project. You can call up a local tree trimming service and say, hey, I need a load of wood chips. Next time you're doing a job, can you drop some off? They may very well drop them off for free. Or they may charge you, $50 or whatever, but you will get a whole like truckload of wood chips. And so there is going to be some labor in spreading those materials out. But really, we're talking about moving it with wheelbarrows and shovels and less of the bending over. Just imagine swapping that out, that you are not going to be on your hands and knees weeding like crazy, because you're going to be setting this garden up, standing up, using, and spreading materials out, and getting other family members involved. That's a good one. To save your back. And when you'll be on your hands and knees, it will be to plant, it'll be to harvest, it'll be to do the fun stuff. And plus we'll get all the benefits. So again, not seeing stuff in the chat, but you're welcome to add questions in the chat. I just keep going. So we're going to talk about materials next. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So Josh is talking about Chip Drop as a service that, requests any local tree company to deliver wood chips free. Yep. When they've completed a job in the local area, you've had success with. That's good. So actually, that's a good point to maybe pause on what's worked for me. I haven't used Chip Drop. My local municipality, they will trim the roadsides and gather the trimmings and then have them chipped once a year, and you can get those chips for free. However, you never know what's in that mix. There could be bittersweet vines or poison ivy and stuff like that, and other invasive species chipped in with that mix, and you might not know what you're going to get. So what I love doing is I do have my own business cards, but like you get a little card made up with your name and keep a few of them. And as you're driving by, if you're seeing road service done and you see that they're just chipping the tops of the tree, they're trimming trees around the power lines, or or you see you're at the grocery store and you literally see a tree service fellow, stop them in the parking lot. They're going to want to like find places to dump their chips, and tell them, hey, I'm looking for clean wood chips without like a lot of, let's just like hardwood chips. Can you drop some off at my house? And you give them their card, and just that like quick little conversation, they're going to want to know where you are. And like, you may end up getting even more loads than you want. You're going to have to tell them, let's just start off with one load, give me a text, whatever. Let's see, spent container. Yes. Yeah. Dumping your spent container gardening stuff on your raised bed. Is that okay to dump that on the bed and add that as a layer? I don't see why not, because typically when you're starting a container garden, you're starting with potting soil that doesn't have weed seeds in it and stuff. It's actually very inert. And if anything, you're going to be adding fertility to that, or it has compost mixed in, it has something mixed in. So here's, if you're asking about the tannins that it could have, and you could kill off the plants. So if you have a container garden, if things are growing in that container garden, then it's not necessarily going to be, if things are growing in the container garden, it would make sense that it's not going to kill off the stuff in your garden. Now, when we talk about wood chips in a no-till garden, let's get into the materials. So when I think about the types of gardens that we talked about, you've heard me talk about vegetable, flower, and herb gardens, which tend to be things where you have to keep replanting them every year. Those are annual gardens. With those, you're going to want to stick to stuff like straw and compost and maybe some leaf or grass clippings and stuff like that. You're going to want to stick to those types of materials. If we're talking about perennial gardens, you're going to want to use wood chips and stuff like that. Stuff that's really thick and that breaks down over time, because if you have a fruit tree or if you got bushes in front of your house, those are going to be things that are going to be planted there for years. And it's okay to put things that slowly decompose around them, but we're not necessarily going to put like cedar around them, because cedar, so when we talk about wood chips, cedars and pines and those softwood species and those aromatic species, the cedar being the aromatic one, the pines and being the softwood species, they tend to have lots of resins in them and stuff like that that actually like hinder decomposition and that can make your soil acidic. So when I'm talking about wood chips, as we are going to be talking about hardwood chips from hardwood species trees like oaks and maples or poplars or whatever you might have around. Those, when they break down, they tend to not increase the soil acidity over time. Plus, if you're also adding compost, you're adding other things besides just wood chips and just straw. When you add a diversity of things to your garden, you're going to really avoid having problems with the stuff that you're adding, because you're going to have different things mixing in. You could think about it as like, having like a spicy dish or something like that. If you add other things into that spicy dish, it's gonna start to mellow it out. Or if you just take a bite of spicy food or something like that. Let's move on. I'll go back to the presentation. Good, thanks for using the chat function there. And types of mulch layers. All right, so we have the handout. I'm not going to go straight to the handout, but you absolutely can. Hay versus straw. So not everybody knows this, and honestly, as a gardener, for me, like it took years for me to like get this straight in my head. So let's get it straight in your head right away. What is the difference between hay and straw? So hay, it has different cuttings. Okay. So a farmer who's harvesting hay from their field is literally just grass that's growing out in the field. And they are doing a first cutting. And that first cutting means that the grass has grown through the spring. And then between spring and summer, they do a first cutting where the grass is kind of grown pretty tall and it has seed heads at the top. Now that you do not want to use that in your garden, because that has seeds that you would then be planting in your garden that would be weed seeds. So hay tends to be like, hay versus straw tends to be like hay is a no-no many times, unless you can get your hand on second cutting hay, or best third cutting hay. What that is that this is hay that's cut later in the season. It has far fewer seed heads. It's mostly going to be stems and leaves, and far fewer seed heads. And third cutting is almost all leaf, very few stems, meaning that you're not adding weed seeds. However, in the whole scheme of things, hay has a market as a feed product. Straw, when we got hay versus straw's got this look to it. Yeah, now you're thinking like, the fall season, you got decorations and stuff like that. Hay has got that like greenage to it. Straw is definitely dried out, it's flat and compressed. Because here's the thing, is that what is straw? Straw is the byproduct of the grain harvesting system, meaning you have wheat and oats and rye and all of those grains, those lovely grains that we love to eat and that animals feed on. And when these go through the combine, when they're harvested, they're grown, they're harvested, and you have a whole wheat field where the combine separates the grain from the chaff. It separates the grain from the stems and the leaf of the plant. The stems and the leaf are straw, and very few of the seeds end up in the straw. Now, is it foolproof? No. Some of the seeds end up in the straw, and so you will sometimes get, not sometimes, you're guaranteed to get some like rye growing if you have rye straw. But here's the thing, is that it's actually pretty easy to just pull those out as they're growing, and even step on them and break them and as you're going through in the no-till gardening system. Okay, so actually I didn't, when we have this whole scheme of things, that I'm realizing that I did want to refer to my handout. So hay and straw, you kind of have those in the back of your head, the difference between them. Straw is excellent Excellent, excellent, excellent. It has so much crisscrossy structure to allow air circulation into it. And when it touches the soil, it just retains moisture right there. And so here's the thing is that like earthworms, they'll come right up and they will eat the fungi that's growing on that moist straw. It's just like a lovely thing to plant in a vegetable, herb, or flower garden. Okay. So we're thinking in our annual garden, we're thinking straws and hays and stuff like that. Again, second or third cutting of hay if you can find it, but stick with straw. And in our perennial gardens, we're thinking wood chips. Now, other things on here, grass clippings. You can read through these, but I have used grass clippings, and the way I use grass clippings is I mix it in with my compost. It adds biomass to my compost, and then my kitchen scraps and the grass clippings and the leaf litter. I use it there to decompose it first before putting it in the garden, because if you just put it on the garden, what happens with grasses and leaves, if you're raking up your leaves, you know it, is that they compact and you get a lack of oxygen. Oxygen can't penetrate into the soil, and what you get is instead of aerobic digestion, you get anaerobic digestion. You get like this a different type of rot, which is not conducive. Yeah, whatever. It does not support a healthy decompositional system within your garden to add fertility. So if you're using grass clippings, it would be used in conjunction with something else, a light layer of grass clippings, a light layer of leaves mixed in with straw, using it all together. All right. Again, that's the best is when you can mix many things together, because then the leaves are adding something different than the straw is adding, then the grass clippings are adding, then the compost is adding. And so little thin layers added up with all of these other things, but eventually need bulk. You need bulk in order to stop sunlight from getting to the soil surface to help germinate those plants and to really smother out those. I want you to have in the back of your head that after it's compressed, you want like just keep 4 inches in the back of your head. If you start off with like 6 inches of fluffy stuff, as it compresses over time, now I don't mean you step on it, but it naturally gets rained on and compressed, rained on and compressed. You're not stepping on this. You want it to still be a good 3-4 inches thick. Otherwise, you will have a thin layer, and weeds seeds will have an easy time germinating through that, and you will not have done what you needed to. Now, what you can do is mix this with things like newspaper, put down a layer of newsprint. And so that newsprint initially is going to make it hard for things to germinate. Eventually it breaks down and you need more newspaper each year. So you can think of things like that. Maybe in a perennial garden where you have bushes and stuff like that, you're setting up, you're doing cardboard down because that's very thick. It's going to take longer to break down. And then you're tossing wood chips on top of it. Again, you're hearing the idea of mixing different layers. And then the next spring, reviving it and maybe putting down maybe another layer of cardboard and another layer of wood chips. You know, in cardboard, you can like tear it up and you can put it around the plants. You can even layer it over each other once or twice. But then you add the wood chips and it's all going to eventually decompose. Now, adding too many layers of newsprint or cardboard could create a situation where when rain falls and it hits that it doesn't seep on through, and it goes through the wood chips or through the straw, hits that thick layer of grass clippings, hits that thick layer of cardboard or of newsprint, and sheets off rather than getting in. So in the whole scheme of things, when we're talking about smothering layers and cardboard and newsprint would be a smothering layer at the very base, we don't want to think like going crazy thick, because we could create a situation where water doesn't penetrate and it doesn't soak in when we get a nice rain. There are so many other things that you can use in this mix. When we talk about layers, you can talk about weed mats and other landscaping fabrics. Again, you'd want to do those in perennial situations. There are biodegradable papers that are sold in big rolls. Those are awesome. Yard waste, like your branches and your woody things, you can have those chipped and stuff like that. Compost, seaweed. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. Back to presentation. We're doing pretty good on time. So I look and we've got about 35 minutes. And so this next part is going to be talking about let's say you've got your garden kind of set up. You've got your first set of layers. How do you plant into it? Imagine that you've got all these layers of straw or whatever. How do you plant seeds in there? And so what I'm going to advocate for is that you actually start to learn how to grow transplants, or you buy transplants. You buy those starts. That's what they're sometimes called, because somebody has started the tomato plant for you, or started the pepper plant for you, started those cucumbers, zucchinis for you. Now, that doesn't mean that that you're always doing that, but maybe you're learning how to make transplants. Again, I'm going to have a whole soil blocking class this summer that you get your garden set up and you want to learn the next step of how to make soil blocks. It's an awesome thing. You're going to get an intro to it now. And I also have a seed starting success class where we talk about starting transplants. That one's a pre-recorded class that's ready to go. If you're really interested in this and you want to learn how to start seedlings off, you'll get an intro to the soil blocks and how to do it. It's actually that one might even be good enough for you to go. It won't be like the intensive whole hour and a half of soil blocks. It'll be a few minutes, 5-10 minutes of it, and you'll probably get the gist of it enough to get going. But you'll get in that seed starting class, we really talk about how the success of starting seeds from scratch. Okay, so let's talk about, and so we got drilling and direct seeding. So if you're tilling your garden like this person has here, you could use a seeder like this to do nice straight rows. I used to garden like this when I had my market garden. I used to grow things in nice long rows that were 50 feet or 100 feet long, but that's a market garden, and to do something like this, you can't have straw in the way. It can't make the furrow and then drop the seed in and then cover it up and tamp it down. That's what that machine does as you walk. It's awesome for planting row crops. However, so what we're really going to be thinking about is the idea of individual placements of seeds. And since we're talking about small gardens, this isn't that bad. But again, this is bare soil. That's not what our garden looks like. How do we plant seeds in ours when we don't have bare soil like this? That's what I want to teach and tell you about. So we really have a few methods starting right from seed. And so starting right from seed is that we could grow our starts, our transplants. I'm going to call them transplants. Okay. And so this is a soil block transplant. However, you could also have these in black plastic trays, where this looks like it's cilantro, an herb that's been grown. And so they took a little clump of seeds, they planted it in the cell, they babied that in a tray, and now they're planting it out. Now, again, we don't have straw or anything here, but can you imagine digging into the straw with one of my favorite garden tools? This is an easy digger. All right, so like I've got links to some of these. This one has a thin blade and then this wider spade, and it's made for just like jabbing in, pulling back, and putting a transplant in. Simple tools like this that are designed the right way. Not like a trowel where I'd have my handle and I'd be digging like this. You can totally do that, and you can take a trowel, put your hand here, and dig in. You know what that looks like. But this is a handier thing. You get into maybe a little compact part or place where there's a rock, you flip it around, and then you spike in, loosen it up, and then flip it around, and then give it and you've got a lot of leverage with something like this. It's a lot easier. They don't sell these at Home Depot or Lowe's or Tractor Supply or any of the big box stores, or even not a lot of garden centers have these. But online, you can find these tools that are made to be nicer on your body. So this one, you'll see a link for this in the resources, the Easy Digger. Again, you're going to be spending $20, $30 on it. But dude, I've had this for years. And I've got a couple of them, and you buy one this year and then just don't run over it with a lawnmower. Not that I've done that. Okay, so other things, so this is another nice tool. This is called a Korean hand plow, and I ran it over with the lawnmower. So it's laying in the grass, and yeah, Yeah, so this had a nice little part here, but it still functions really nicely. So the Korean hand plow you can find in lots of different places. This, so how would we use this in the garden? What we would do is we would pull back a row with our hands. We just use our hands or with a rake to pull back and expose some soil surface. And then we would use something like this to drop it in the soil. And then like a plow, all you do is pull and it opens up a furrow where you can plant your seeds. So if you're going to be doing green beans, you're going to be doing anything in rows. Yeah, you're on your hands and knees for this. You're separating it out. You're making. But here's the thing. Imagine this. You're then going to be bringing the straw back close to it, not covering it, but back close to it, so sunlight can get to it. And that little seedling's going to pop up through the straw. It's going to grow. And you're going to, if you're going to have weeds, it'll be right around those plants and you'll just weed right around those plants. But the rest of the garden is going to be relatively weed free because you put down a big thick layer. So again, something like this, even if you have a raised bed, a 4 foot by 4 foot area, awesome tools, awesome tools. So this one is really good for making rows. Okay. This one is really good for popping in and putting in an individual transplant. Could I do that with this one? Yes, it's yes and no. It's really not made for putting in and digging a little hole. It's not, just look at this as I pop it in, look at where my hand is. It doesn't necessarily want to dig out. And you know, it wants to be pulled. That's how it's designed, this Korean hand plow. It's designed for a pull. It's also amazing for scraping out weeds. You got a weed, you just take this in here and just like pop it out and cut its head off when it's young. This is a really good tool and an extension to your hand. That's why you're taking this class. For some of these really simple things, again, $20 to $30. You're probably not going to find them locally, so you're going to be buying them online. And I've got links in the handouts for these, and they're going to last you forever, even when you run it over with a lawnmower. Okay, so that's it for, look at that, 2 different tools for planting, 1 other tool for planting. Let's say I've got something where I just want to pop in seeds here and a seed here. I don't want to do a whole row of seeds, but I want to do like my cucumber, my zucchini seeds, one or 2 big seeds here. So now you get the thing called a dibble, the zombie killer. Ha! And so this is a fun one to give kids because you start to, in the middle school, you start to see them be like, and you give them 2 and then they're suddenly like some kind of superhero or whatever. And then you talk about safety. You talk about that before you give it to them. But anyway, a dibble, you can make a dibble out of a wooden dowel and stuff like that. But something like this, it is designed for nice hand grips and everything like that. This I've had this for years. And I just keep it stored inside. Yeah, the wood start to split, but it's still doing its job. When I need to plant a seed, a single seed, I will do this, pop it in the soil about, a couple inches, give it a little turn around, and that opens up and makes it wide. I'll drop the seed in, or 2 seeds. If I'm worried about germination, I'll drop 1 or 2 cucumber seeds in, and then I will take my hand and then the soil surface and press down around it. Again, the mulch is all there. And all we did is we put a really big seed in that we're not putting in rows, and we target planted it where it's going to be. So I love planting corn with this. I love planting cucumbers, zucchini, and stuff like that, and maybe small transplants where I don't need a big hole to be dug. I will use this to carve out a little space. I do have this, but if you're setting up a garden, a big old tape. Get a big tape. Get a big tape. Make nice straight lines. Put stakes in the ground, and make a nice little setup for yourself. So let's go back. Remember, we were talking about how do you plant into a garden, and we talked about we can't use this, but we could do furrows. Now, do you see how we have a tool? We will pull back the straw in a row, and then we will use that tool to nicely space out bean seeds or something that wants to be planted in rows, our carrots, our radishes, and stuff like that. With herbs and stuff like that, they loved, and tomatoes and everything. These are things that where you go to the garden center, buy a set of starts that somebody else has created for you, support them, give them a little bit of money. They help to get them going, or learn to do it yourself. So as we go through this, so your starters could look like this. Okay, so in black plastic trays, or they could be like I'm talking about, soil blocks. So look at this. This doesn't use plastic at all. If you'd like, or use a minimal amount of plastic that's reusable year after year after year. And so a soil block is a compressed block of soil where you use a special tool to compress that potting soil mixture. And you learn how to make your own potting soil mixture because they don't sell it off the store shelves, except Johnny's does. Johnny Seeds does. And this is what the little handheld tool looks like. They do make stand-up versions of the tool that look like this, and I own them because I like to make lots of soil blocks. Now, price tag, $30-ish. Yeah, it might be 35. I don't know what inflation's doing with this stuff, but we're in that, like, you know, it's a basic garden tool. It's going to last you for your whole life, and you can pass it down to your kids because it's made out of stainless steel, and you're using it a few times a year. Every time you're making starts outside or inside. And the stand-up one, the price tag on that's going to be about $200. So that's a significant jump. However, if you do know that you're in this for the long haul, and the way I paid for my tool was I started, a little side story is that, like, with my little garden, I knew that lots of people who follow me wanted like heirloom tomatoes. How did I pay for my $200 tools? I've got 3 of them for 3 different sized blocks. How did I get that money? Well, one spring, I made soil block transplants. I bought the tools first, but then I made the transplants of heirloom tomatoes. And I sold groups of those little soil blocks of heirloom tomatoes. So I did one whole tray of those green tomatoes, one whole tray of these beautiful purple tomatoes, and these cherry tomatoes, and all different types of heirloom tomatoes. And so I had my little germination area, and I set them up, and I got them started, and then I transplanted them into little soil blocks. And then I sold them in little groups, and I was able to make enough money to sell and pay for my tools, which I now have. So little things like that, get involved in marketplaces and stuff like. There are plenty of people, local people, looking for stuff that's not grown at the garden center. And yeah, I had to buy seed packets. I had to buy for each one of those heirloom tomatoes. I probably did 20 different types of tomatoes, but then I planted those seeds, and a customer would get like a dozen different tomato plants. And I did the same thing with peppers that year. And it was a neat little side business. I don't have to do it now. And you know, now I can kind of change my business model. But my point is that the home gardener is likely going to be able to afford this tool. And if you want to step it up, if you know that you're going to be doing this for decades, this is definitely something that you're going to be doing for decades. It is worth investing in the expensive tool. And I'm just giving you an idea of how you could make it pay for itself. Now, the little hand tool, again, you know, when I do the intensive class this summer, I'm going to be modeling through how do we make the soil for this? How do we, you know, when would I use different sized soil blocks for this? You know, that's what that class is going to be for, and how would I manage it? But this is what it looks like. They get pressed out, and here's where the plastic comes in, is that you might choose to use wooden trays that you make, or you buy some plastic trays that you use year after year after year after year. And I have 6-year-old trays that I'm still using today, and I'm going to be using them for a few more years at least before they get too brittle from sun exposure and stuff like that. But yeah, that's soil blocks. A lot less plastic. You make it yourself, and then you plant right into it. I do have, let's see, I've got a couple of the tools here just to show you in person, is that this soil blocker has little squares at the end for planting these mini blocks. So again, another $30 tool or so. But if I'm doing tomatoes, I would do little mini blocks, and then take these and transplant them when they're big enough into the bigger blocks. And then there's other little dibbles. These are smaller ones. Again, we look at the size. So about the same space, but you get way more per tray with this one. So my class it's going to teach like when do I use different sized ones. Let's move on. The whole idea is that like we can plant into our no-till garden by using transplants that we buy or that we make on our own, and that we can direct seed into there. All right, I went over some of my favorite tools. Let's see, let's see, some of the other ones that I was able to grab for this that I thought were most important for this were watering wands. So working in the greenhouse system, you see them use watering wands everywhere. Now, again, you keep hearing me say this price of like $30. It's because nothing's 20 anymore. So you should expect to pay 30, 35 or whatever dollars for a watering wand, and you should get one. And you should attach to the end of it these quick connects. Don't get plastic ones, get metal ones. All right. These are brass fittings. They will last forever. Now, when you buy these little quick connects, get enough for every little attachment for the end of your garden hose for this, and for any sprinklers that you plan on using. You can quick connect the end of the hose to that. And at the end of it, now this is a Y connector, but I would also put in a shutoff valve at the end of your hose. Why are you taking this class? It's to get little tricks like this. It is a pain in the butt to undo the hose connections every time you want to connect something and then you want to connect it to your house. At my house, at the spigot, I have a quick connect, female port right at the spigot where I plug my hose in, and then I turn the water on. And then at the end of the hose, I have a shutoff valve at the end of the hose and another connector for my watering wand, or just for if I don't use it, just for filling up buckets, or for my sprinklers. Now, we're not talking about like watering the garden all the time, but if a sprinkler like this, again, made of metal, not plastic like really breaks down every time you're leaving it in the sun. You'll step on it, you'll break it, you'll beat it up, get some metal ones. Again, everything here is like, it's made out of metal. This one, the end of it is made out of plastic, and my kid dropped it on the ground, broke the plastic. And so I bought a new end to this with a nice fine rose. That's what that's called. A fine, so it rains the water down. It breaks the water up rather than spray wands and stuff like that. So here's the thing. If you have a large garden, so large meaning like mine is about 40 by 50. And so when I'm watering that, I put this on one corner and have it do half the garden. And I'll let it water for like a half an hour or so. Now, since I have a no-till garden, that water is seeping down through the soil, and the very top layer in the heat of the summer is going to dry out, but most of that water is going to settle and stay in the soil and not get evaporated away. And then I take this and I put it in the opposite corner, and it's going to water the other half of my garden. Now there's going to be overlap, of course, in the middle where those semicircular areas hit, but this is my preferred method. This goes on a wooden post, and then my quick connect comes up to it. Okay. Now, if you have smaller garden areas, then stuff like this, that as it rotates, it waters a fan. When that fan ends up kind of watering a rectangular space, and the amount of pressure you put in it determines how far out that fan goes. And it just waters back and forth, back and forth. One thing I don't have here, and I'm realizing, is I don't have my timer. Now, another thing to put in this whole connecting system is right before I connect into this, I have a quick connect on a water timer. Again, you're thinking like 20 bucks or so, but it's worth it, especially if you have well water, because you set that, it's a little twist turn timer. You set that timer, and after 30 minutes goes off, it shuts the water off for you, and you don't forget to turn the water off. Now, so I'm just showing you, like, these are some of my favorite tools for watering and for planting in a no-till gardening thing. There are other tools that are my favorites, but as far as like a no-till gardening one, like it's basic. I think another one that I don't have in hand would be a pitchfork. Now, not a spade fork. Go ahead and Google that later. Spade fork, pitchfork. Pitchfork is meant for grabbing and pitching and throwing hay. So for spreading materials out, I love using a pitchfork for digging into so 5 or 6 fingered pitchfork for digging into wood chips or straw. Wood chips are really hard to dig into with a shovel. You shouldn't. It's like hitting a wall every time with a shovel. But a pitchfork goes right into all those wood chips, picks up a clump into your wheelbarrow, and then from your wheelbarrow you dump it, and then you just use the fork to spread it out. All right, let's go back. We're doing pretty good on time. Oh yes, so now we get to the how did I transition my tilled garden into a no-till garden dream? And so this is the transition. So I had a tilled garden space, And I even had raised beds in it. I got rid of the raised beds, the wood in all of it, because I was really sick of the replacing boards. Personally, it was the end of its life, and I didn't want to invest in replacing boards anymore. So my cousin, I found some. He had a pickup truck. I don't have a pickup truck, and I found somebody online who was selling these straw bales for $50 a piece. Now that is bulk buy. If you can find big round bales like this, each one of these, it's something like 10 little rectangular bales. And I had my big area here, and I got, I think, three of these bales, no, two of these bales, and it was enough to cover this whole garden. Now, what did I also do? I also bought a load of compost. A local farmer was selling compost for about $100 a load. He came with his dump truck, dumped the yard of compost, and I spread that thin layer of compost out everywhere. Now, look, this garden's not perfect. It's a mess, but it ends up getting covered with compost and then this huge layer of straw on top. Now, that straw is dry. And so one of the things that I start to do is water that. Now, if it's in the spring, which this was, I didn't have to worry about watering it to get it moist and to get it compacted down and everything because the rains came. Now, while that was going, I was starting in my greenhouse. I was starting my soil block transplants. Some of this was started in my basement. Some of this is just started out here in my greenhouse. So if you had a cold frame, again, if you take my my other class on seed starting success, we get into how I know not everybody has a greenhouse. Nobody has a greenhouse. So how can you get beautiful transplants like this using your cellar, using a spare closet, using a little grow area in your house to get some transplants like this? So we got look at all this beautiful. I see like beets, and I see some cilantro and herbs, and I see some guys. Look at this. I failed. Look at these. They didn't germinate. That's because I didn't have like a really controlled system. Actually, some of these, I think this one might have had snow peas in it, and the mice in the greenhouse ate all my snow peas. They took them away. So anyway, but the vast majority of this has success. And then what did I do? I transplanted them into my garden. So this isn't it's not beautiful. This is chaotic, but look at this. I had, at the ends of the rows, I put sunflowers, and then I had my green beans, which I planted in rows. It's really hard to see. And then I had some squash. And then, man, the jungle just started, forming. I have my compost pile over here near my chickens, a couple different compost systems, like a little bin like that, and a freeform thing where I just gather materials here. And again, I've got herbs growing here. I see basil that's growing. It's a jungle among the tomatoes and the basil. But I've also got walking paths. So look, this is chaotic. This is my garden. Your garden can look more organized. It will look more organized if you are using raised beds. So this is like a project in place, but more what I'm showing is that I've got flowers planted in here. My lettuces had gone to seed, and I like to harvest my lettuce seeds to reuse from year to year. So that's what's actually happening here. And then underneath this row is a whole bunch of roots, carrots that I had planted there. So, and again, this turns into a jungle where as the summer goes on, the sunflowers bloom. My orchard is back here. My chickens are on the side. This is my little heaven, is having this spot. And so here, later on in the season, the beans have given away to the gigantic squash plants that are here in the back. Over on the other side, I've got tomatoes and stuff like that. Plant what you like. I love herbs. So I've got my borage, my rosemary, my stevia, my thyme, my lavender, all growing in a little herb area that I've got going. And I had some greens over here. So all of this, how did all of this start? All of this was transitioning from tilling to no-till by spreading layers. And I want you to see, in all honesty, the amount of weeds that are here. If we even back up, there really aren't weeds because these huge plants overshadowed what was there. There was an area where there were some weeds right here, but this, I know what this is. This is mint. That's because I got a mint problem over in this area of the garden. I have to keep getting this out. That's a whole different weed problem. Right here, do you see this grass that's growing? That is from the rye straw, I think. Or well, yeah, this is all together. I don't know. That's not rye, but this is a weed from the straw itself. And I had to keep picking some of those out as we're growing. So it was easy for me to maintain this. And it still is easy for me to maintain. Now, what does my no-till gardening look like in my orchard? Well, I lay down landscape fabric, and then I'm putting down thick layers of wood chips around it. And then as these are here, the grass underneath breaks down, and a few months later, I start planting herbs and flowers and maybe raspberries and stuff like that underneath this. Now, planting mushrooms in my garden, I do a whole mushroom growing class as well. I know you're like, this is just an advertisement for his other, it's just that I teach lots of things. And so if you're interested, here's a really cool thing in the no-till gardening class. A real companion to this class is the mushroom growing class, where we talk about growing mushrooms in your garden. Do you see this white mycelium right here? This is fungal tissue. And what is that worm doing? It is eating the fungal tissue. I don't know, most people don't necessarily know what do worms eat. They eat dirt. They don't eat dirt. They happen to ingest the dirt because the dirt has bacteria and fungi and yeast and all other little things in it. And the worm is eating that stuff, that fungal tissue, that bacterial tissue, and it's those bacterial cells, and then pooping them out as worm castings, digesting them, and actually making the soil more fertile than it was before. So here's what happens in a no-till gardening system. Naturally, fungi and yeast are going to eat your straw. They're going to eat and decompose your wood chips and whatever else you put down there in layers. And that's why you have to keep adding layers every year to keep feeding the soil. If you plant fungi, mushrooms, edible mushrooms, in the straw that are meant to grow in straw, now not every fungi is meant to do that, but it will accelerate the decomposition process of that, feeding more worms. You will pull off the soil and see handfuls of worms right at the soil surface, pooping out and decomposing that straw and that and those wood chips, and releasing the nutrients into your plants. And then again, you're going to be replacing. Do you have to keep planting year after year, planting the mushrooms? No, that fungal tissue is going to stay around. But here's the benefit of it is that you're going to have mushrooms fruiting. Now, this is a wine cap mushroom fruiting at the base of your zucchini and your tomato plants, and right there. So there's a tomato plant and there's a cluster of mushrooms right there. So if you like mushrooms, man, this is a neat thing to do, where you pull back the straw that you just spread down, that I spread down, and then I use the sawdust spawn to spread this fungal tissue around, and it creates a living mat. All of these end up connecting to each other, becoming one living organism underneath the soil of your straw, feeding the worms, feeding your plants. Again, you got the gist of it now. The nitty-gritty details you can learn on your own. Or yeah, I do have that mushroom growing class where we talk about wine caps and other mushrooms. But a big chunk of the class is talking about growing mushrooms in your garden, and what does the details of that look like. All right, and so here's my school no-till garden. Okay, so different style, different structure. We had Eagle Scouts who built this and the little greenhouse that's on site. Our storage shed was definitely something that we needed. And so what have we got here? We've got lots of different things planted. And because this is off at the edge of and there's a parking lot that looks over here, I plant these huge sunflowers here in the corners of the beds to make it so people are like, there it is. There's the garden. They can see these beautiful sunflowers from the 10 feet tall all the way from the parking lot. But yeah, this is what it looked like one year. This is me trying to splice the pictures together, and what it could look like if you're doing different things in each bed. Okay, so this is towards the fall season. It's not full fall, but this is at the end of a summer, and me just kind of taking pictures of like, what does it look like at the end of the summer after some things have come and gone. A little compost roller over there. I'm definitely proud of it. All right, so we're right towards the end, and let's just talk about it. You've set up your no-till garden, you've planted in it, you've harvested, and how do you revive it? How do you keep it going? You've already heard me say this. You keep putting down layers. So this is a picture of my chickens, and look at this. This is after 1 year. one year. So this is the fall after I set the garden up. You already saw that garden growing. Do you look at this bare soil? The worms that were eating the fungal tissue was eating the straw. And look at, this is why we need to add straw, or we need to add compost and straw every year to this system. So I've got my compost pile. I'm gathering stuff all year long and decomposing and breaking it down. And so in my garden, and you see how I use stakes here to kind of define my rows and my walking paths. That's all I do. That way, if I need to bring a hose in, it can wrap around a stake and not like crush my plants. And these are just like 2 foot tall stakes. And I have a nice wide path going down the middle, if we're talking about garden structure, for wheelbarrows, and even a tractor could fit down the middle. I've chosen to give up that growing space for the convenience of maneuverability, and instead I have only 1 foot walking paths in between my 4 foot growing areas. It's a really good, I love my design. Okay, so quick connects. Oh, there it is. There's the water, the timer. What I'm hoping to get is like pictures of what is the refreshing the garden, but there's that water timer that's at the end before I plug it into a sprinkler. This is what a bale of compact straw looks like from a place like Tractor Supply. These are going for $15, I think. And to do my garden, I need 6 to 8 of them. Typically, I buy 8, but I can get away with 6 now that I have an established system. This is what a bale of non-compressed bale of hay looks like. This is an aged bale of hay, which again, be careful with hay. So what are we looking at here? I'm spreading compost over the previous year's surface. Okay, and I'm doing it where those garden beds are. You know, I'm not able to hit all the areas. I'm not doing the walking paths, just the growing areas. Spreading that compost out, and then again, just multiple angles of the same thing. This is spring. And then I am adding straw on top of that, a nice thick layer of straw again to decompose and add those layers. And this is what it looks like with the straw on top of mainly those growing areas, worrying less about the walking paths. But the walking paths eventually I covered with wood chips. I don't know if I have a picture of that, but again, mainly the growing areas, but not that walking path. And that's how you're going to refresh it. This is just other angles of showing the process of the bare soil and partial straw from the previous year, transitioning to getting covered with mulch, getting covered with straw, and then watering it down. And yeah, some other pictures of planting. We've already talked about this, planting garlic. I had some videos, those you guys can watch. And it's about time to wrap things up. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to take a quick look at questions. So you'll get access to this presentation where you could watch my little family videos that I put in here. They're not things that I upload to YouTube. Oh, here's a picture of now, not the first year, not the second year, but the third year. So the third year of the no-till garden, where I've got straw again going down the growing areas. And now I've transitioned to wood chips in this area that's just always going to get walked on, and wood chips over here in my orchard, wood chips around the bed. So areas that are going to be like perennial and I'm not going to be disturbing. I actually have asparagus growing along under these wood chips. And I have rhubarb growing at the other edge of the bed. Rhubarb is an excellent border plant for a garden because it really shades out and stops grass from coming into the garden. That's a really good one for you to take away from this. Rhubarb around. If I could do rhubarb around the whole garden, I would, but that'd be a lot of rhubarb. But anyway, it's worth to see. You're taking this class so you can see what it looks like in multiple years. And this is my style of garden. You can see how like we're adding more and more and more to this every year. So let's leave this, see if there's any questions or Q&A as we wrap up. But I wanted to thank you guys. Let's just take a glance over things. So yeah, okay. So somebody's asking about their raised beds got overrun with weeds. I know what that's like. One year I put hay down and I made that mistake and planted weeds all over my garden. So what's the best process to transition to the no-till to be able to plant this year. It is going to be smothering. And so I would, if it was my garden, I would find a barrier layer. I would either, so if it's a perennial area, so you said vegetable garden, so vegetable garden, I would be gathering newsprint and or cardboard now and laying it out in the garden, and then immediately it's going to blow away. So immediately covering it with straw. I would be investing right now in the winter months in bales of straw, gathering them, because if you wait till the growing season, straw is not going to be around. So you want to hunt that down early on, and also banking and gathering enough newsprint and cardboard. So you heard me say use cardboard in a perennial one, but here's the thing is that if you really did have a big weedy problem, you might want a huge barrier to stop those weeds from growing that first year. And so you could do that with, 2-3 layers of newsprint or 1 layer of cardboard. And I think that would be a nice base, smothering base. And then a thick layer, again, you're thinking like 6 inches of fluffy that compresses down to about 4 inches of straw. And then let it sit. I would actually not worry so much about planting early this year. I know you might want to get in there, but that cardboard and that newsprint, you kind of want it to sit for about a month or so to loosen up. And then it's going to make it much easier to dig into. So I would be thinking transplants and stuff like that. You might want, if you had cardboard in your garden and you had a layer that you needed to cut through. This is a garden tool called a hori hori. And it is used, it's a gigantic knife. If you've seen Crocodile Dundee, you're having like flashbacks of that movie. So I'm not going to do an impression. You want me to? I'm not. But anyway, a hori hori is a curved spaded knife with a serrated side and a smooth knife edge side. Why am I showing you this? Because this is a good tool if you have a layer of cardboard that you need to cut through, and then you wanted to make a furrow. And so that cardboard, why am I saying wait a month? Because after a month, or a few weeks at least, it's guaranteed to be sopping wet. And you can cut through it and then plant into it. I hope that kind of answers how I would start a no-till garden from an existing garden that might have been very weedy before. I would think layers, and I would think not necessarily tilling. I would just start the layers immediately. Do you get several large straw bales every year, spring or fall? I have not been able to source the big round bales anymore. I am only able to get the compressed bales. And so in the winter months, my rhythm is I know I need 8 to do my 40 by 50 foot garden. You can kind of work backwards on the math for that, square foot wise. And I know I need 8 at least to cover it. I would need more if I was starting in the beginning and I need to do all the paths and everything. I would need more. I'd go up to 12. I'd do 1.5 times that much, 12. Each one of those bales is going to cost money. It's going to cost, it's a compressed bale. It's going to cost money. So I in the winter months, I start buying a couple at my local Tractor Supply because they have those. And that's where I go. You find where your local supply is. And I buy a couple 1 month when I go in, next month. And after, 4 months of buying two every month, I've got them set aside and ready to go for the spring. Is the glue in the cardboard a problem? A lot of no. A lot of the glues and the dyes and the inks are the inks tend to be soy-based these days. You are absolutely right. If there's staples in there, if there's plastic tape, you want to rip all that off. But no, it's cardboard tends to be a relatively safe thing, in the organic gardening thing. It ends up like getting decomposed. So good question with that. I mean, liability wise, don't take my word for it. If you're worried about the glue, do some research. Don't sue me if like something happens. All right, we're right there. Thanks for asking questions. You're going to have my contact information. I do these one and done classes. There's always somebody who, okay, you won't sue me. Thank you. You always have these one and done classes, but there's always people who have questions. So you're going to get the handout, you're going to get access to the video and the presentation. And if there's anything that's not in here that you think I should put in here, send me a link or notice and I'll put it in there. And what I'm doing with a lot of my classes, I haven't really done it with this one, but if there's a video of something that you want to see, I've been making standalone videos and linking them to the document. So if there's part of the process that you really want to see, and I might be able to make a video, let me know. I will make it. It'll be a private video on YouTube, which you'll be able to get access to with this whole Google Doc. All right. Love you guys. Thanks for showing up. I got a little half an hour and then I'm going to be doing the Get Your Grove On class. So everybody take care. Bye. Actually using this, that's a good idea. Thanks. All right. Take care.